And joining me now is America's ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley. Ambassador Haley, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thank you, Chuck, for having me. I appreciate it.
Let me start with the basic question. What is the policy objective to the airstrike?
Well, I think what you were looking at was this has obviously been a very intense week, but also a very successful week. I think the goal was, here you had a leader who we have seen multiple times before use chemical weapons on his people, and this is probably one of the worst ones that we've seen. And, something had to be done. And I think the president very much saw that we can't let this continue. This was about national security. This was about international security, and it was about arrogance. And so the president said that he was going to put a stop to it and let them know that we were paying attention. And I think he did that quite well.
Okay. So it was, it sounds like what you're saying is the airstrike was intended to send a message. But what is the hope here? Is there another objective beyond this, or is it going to take more military action to achieve to achieve what you're hoping to get?
Well, I don't think that's dependent on the United States. I think that's dependent on the actors that are at play. I mean, this is a very complicated situation. We know there's no easy solution to the crisis that's in Syria, but our focus is to make sure that, we're focused on strengthening the ceasefire. We want to continue to have the backs of our allies, Turkey, Jordan, Iraq, make sure they know that we've got their backs. We want to push towards a political solution, because at the end of the day, that's really what is needed, is to make sure a political solution comes together. And we hope that they'll continue those talks in Geneva, and we hope that we'll continue to see some progress.
A big part of that political solution would include the Russians. Obviously, they don't accept the conclusion that the United States and others did, that this was Assad's regime that ordered this chemical weapons attack. Do you plan to present the evidence publicly, and do you plan to do it at the United Nations? Where is the evidence going to be presented?
The interesting thing, Chuck, is when this chemical weapons murder happened to so many people, Russia's reaction was not, how horrible, or how could they do this to innocent children, or how awful is that? Their initial reaction was, Assad didn't do it. The Syrian government didn't do it. Why were they that defensive that quick? The idea of the casualties came after. The first priority for them was to cover for Assad. And so what we knew from intelligence, that the Syrian regime had done this again, as they had done so many times before. We had the evidence that they had done it. It's obviously classified, so certainly I'm not the one that would release that information, but it was enough that the president knew. It's enough that his national security team, we all saw it and were, informed about it. And I think that's why the president acted. And I will tell you, the reaction at the United Nations has been quite interesting. It's combined with relief about seeing the United States strong and actually taking the lead. And it's also just about being so supportive of the fact. I mean, really, to see all of our colleagues just so relieved and happy to see this happen. It was almost like they were saying,
so
finally.
there's no plans on presenting the evidence public. I mean, if you look, isn't it important in order to isolate Russia, to publicly show how wrong they are about this?
So I don't doubt that information won't come out. I think that you're also seeing the investigations of Russia now. That information is going to come out when they can declassify it. So I fully expect that the proper directors will come out with that information. But for right now, all we needed to know in that room was, is it true? Did it happen? What's the evidence? And go with that. And what you saw was, we watched the president in what I believe was his finest hour since he's taken office, because he was very thoughtful about it. He talked about risk. What General Mattis and the military did was just a rock star performance, because they were so focused on making sure there were limited civilian casualties, if any at all. They were focused on making sure they hit the air base where the Syrian government actually used the planes to carry the chemical weapons. And they were focused on making sure that they understood the United States is not going to allow chemical weapons use ever.
Let me ask you this, though.
We needed to make that point.
What is better about a barrel bomb that's used to kill people at this point than a chemical weapon? Obviously, chemical weapons are not supposed to be used in any warfare at all. But these barrel bombs that Assad is using is also killing thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. when does that cross a line, that atrocity line, where America morally needs to do something?
You know, that's a decision for the president to make. What I can tell you is that what happened on Tuesday was a violation of the Chemical Weapons Convention. It was a violation of multiple Security Council resolutions, and it was something that the president was not going to put up with, and the entire administration was in agreement that this was something that had to be done. This was something that needed to tell Assad enough is enough. And this was something to let Russia know, you know what, we're not going to have you cover for this regime anymore, and we're not going to allow things like this to happen to innocent people. So, you know, the reason why I said in the United Nations was, you know, we took a very moderate approach, but this administration is capable of more, and we hope we don't have to do that, but is very much capable of doing more. And you're not going to see the president come out and tell you what his plan is, right. But you are going to know that the president is putting thought on it, he is watching, and he will act if needed.
I guess what I'm trying to ask is, if Assad doesn't use chemical weapons, but this civil war continues, and he's brutal, but he uses conventional weapons to be brutal, are we going to sit on the sidelines?
I think what you're going to see is we're going to keep all of our thoughts and plans close to the chest. This president's not going to go and release any sort of information, but I think what you are going to see is pressure on the political solution. That's really what's going to happen. I mean, in no way do we look at peace happening in that area with Iranian influence. In no way do we see peace in that area with Russian covering up for Assad. In no way do we see peace in that area with Assad as the head of the Syrian government. And we have to make sure that we're pushing that process. The political solution has to come together for the good of the people of Syria.
I have to ask you, though, about the president's change of heart. In 2013, a series of tweets back during that standoff there when President Obama was contemplating taking similar action. Private citizen Donald Trump tweeted, "President Obama, do not attack Syria. There is no upside and tremendous downside. Save your powder for another and more important day." And another tweet, "Be prepared. There is a small chance that our horrendous leadership could unknowingly lead us into World War III." And another tweet, "Again, to our very foolish leader, do not attack Syria. If you do, many very bad things will happen. And from that fight, the U.S. gets nothing." Was the change of heart solely seeing those pictures?
I don't know what his thought process was in 2013, and I'm not going to attempt to try and explain that. What I can tell you is through the meetings we had all this week, what you saw was a president that was disgusted by what the Assad regime did to those innocent people. You saw him thoughtful about what this would mean. You saw him analyze the risks and the strategic benefits that could happen from this. And you saw him look to his partners in the council and get advice, and then he made a very strong decision. And I will tell you, that was seen successfully around the world. I think it was enough to put Assad on notice. I think that anybody that would attempt to use chemical weapons or do anything to hurt innocent people at this point will absolutely think twice, and they should.
Is it fair to say that the United States has now inserted itself into this civil war?
I think the United States has inserted itself that when we see violations, when we see bad actors who hurt innocent people, and when we see that they're going against international law, the United States is not going to sit back and watch that happen. To look at those kids and to see those families, in some cases, families had left to get away from all of the fighting. Right. There was one family hiding in a cave, and then they get blasted with chemical weapons. I mean, this was horror at its worst, but it was beyond immoral. This was just horrific in a way that no one could even comprehend. And it needed to be said, it needed to be seen, and it needed to be acted on immediately. And I think that the president in the United States was justified in what happened, and I think the rest of the world appreciates it, and those that need to be put on notice were put on notice.
You were at the Women in the World Summit on Wednesday, interviewed by my colleague, Greta Van
Yes.
Susteren. I want to play a clip of it and ask you about it on the other side.
We have to express America's values. We are always the moral conscience of the world. And so our focus is to make sure that we're...
That was an audience member that asked what about the refugees? You didn't get a chance to answer. What about the fact that we are not allowing Syrian refugees unless under the most extreme circumstances into this country right now?
Well, first of all, it wasn't that I wasn't allowed to answer. You couldn't hear the question.
Understand. No,
There
I
were
get
quite
that.
a few questions that were being thrown out from the audience. Look, this is what I will tell you. I have watched this administration focus so much on the safety of United States citizens. And as a mom and as a wife, I'm very grateful for that. And so what this president has done is said, prove to me that you are vetting these people properly. And if you are vetting them properly, then we will resume where we are. But until then, you have to prove to me that these people are being vetted in a way that we're not putting American citizens at risk. And so what he did was, I think that there were those countries that we knew that there were problems that we couldn't vet. And that's key. You can't vet. You don't know who you're letting in. You don't know if there's any sort of bad intentions there. And so what you're seeing is the president's being very cautious with that. And he's making sure that it's people safety first. And so it's interesting. I was watching on your station yesterday was, you saw a Syrian refugee, and he basically, or a Syrian that's here in the United States, and he said, I totally understand what the president's doing. But he said he looks forward to going home. He doesn't want to stay in the United States. He wants to go back and be with his family. And I think that the focus we need to have is, how do we get to a safe Syria? How do we make sure that those that have fled that area can go home and make sure they get back there? But the president's not going to sacrifice the safety of American citizens and let.
Then who should bear that sacrifice? These Syrians that you have so eloquently noted, these women and children in particular, that were trying to flee get out of harm's way, and they end up getting gassed by Assad. Who should take that burden if the United States is not going to help out?
Well, I think you saw the United States take that burden this week. The United States fought for the people of Syria and told Assad no more. And I think that's something that was strong for the United States to do, and I think it was needed. I think we desperately needed to send a message that, you know what, Russia's not going to have your back anymore, and if they do, we're going to make sure that both of you know that we're not going to settle for it.
Well, you brought up Russia, and I know in some talking points that got circulated that among the things that the administration wants to make clear is that Russia faces a choice. Either it takes responsibility for ensuring that Assad complies with the removal of chemical weapons, as Russia committed to do, or it admits it lacks the ability to control Assad. Okay, you guys want Russia's posture to change on Syria. That you have made clear probably more than any other member of this administration. If they don't change their behavior, what's next? Are you going to introduce sanctions at the UN? Is it more sanctions here? What's next to get Russia to change its behavior in Syria?
Well, first of all, I think what we did was we put Russia on notice at the United Nations this week by saying, okay, you tell us, are you, just being compliant? Do is it that you know that chemical weapons are there and you're not putting it out and you're just protecting Assad for some reason? Or is there ignorance within the government because you supposedly were supposed to get rid of the chemical weapons and you haven't done that? Or is Assad playing you for a fool in the fact that he has chemical weapons, he's going to continue to use them and not worry about it because you continue to have his back? Russia has to answer to that. That's what we're waiting to see. What we're not going to allow is for Russia to have Assad's back anymore. What we are going to say is, look, when you have a violation of the chemical weapons issue and you've got a violation of Security Council resolutions over and over again, and you vetoed 7 times to protect this war criminal, we're going to call you out on it. We're going to call you out for the fact that you're covering up.
Well, how do they pay a price?
Well, I think now they've got a decision to make, and I think the price they pay will be based on what the administration decides. But, this is not something that the administration has to decide all future actions today. This is something that the administration is saying, we're going to watch everyone's reaction. We're going to see what they do. If Russia becomes a good actor, we need to defeat ISIS, and we need to make sure that happens. If Russia is not going to be a good actor and going to aid Assad in chemical weapons use, we'll respond accordingly.
And final question, what is now the priority in Syria? Assad's removal or defeating ISIS? Before, the emphasis was on defeating ISIS, then we'll deal with Assad. Has that changed?
Well, I think what you have to understand is we can have multiple priorities. So, of course it's to defeat ISIS. I mean, that we've got to do that for peace and stability in the area. It's also to get out the Iranian influence, which we think is causing so much friction and worse issues in the area. And then we've got to go and make sure that we actually see a leader that will protect his people. And clearly, Assad is not that person.
All right, Ambassador Nikki Haley, I will leave it there. Not a lot of easy answers to this problem, but I appreciate you coming on and sharing.